I'm making a new video about retrofitting these kind of superchargers for applications that are not original. And I had questions on my old video, and so I'm going to make a new video kind of regarding some of the questions and give you a little more information about installing one of these. And these are both superchargers that can be found in either Jaguars or Land Rovers. The one right here is found in your '09 and earlier Jaguars and Land Rovers with the 4.2 V8. And then the second one right here is a TVS supercharger that is found in the 2010 and newer Jaguars and Land Rovers with the 5.0 engine. And this supercharger right here, I've used quite a few times to supercharge engines with this one. I like to use these kind of superchargers because they can usually be found pretty cheap, used. Maybe $300 or $400. Maybe for the TVS, you can score one for maybe about $500 or so. And that's a much better deal than, say, getting like one of those Detroit 671 or 871 superchargers. To buy one of those, you need several $1,000s to get one of those used. And then you don't even know for sure if they're good or not, if you're going to need to buy extra parts. And of course, then you got the B&M and your Wien superchargers, and those also can be had for a pretty high dollar, and those have been discontinued. And those, man, you're not gonna find any one of those for less than $1,000. More like $2,000 or $3,000 for a weekend or used B&M supercharger and things like that. So I'm gonna talk to you about basically retrofitting one of these from their salvage yard or on eBay, and putting them in a vehicle that didn't originally come with these, and some of the challenges you'll need to overcome in order to adapt these for use in in an engine that these superchargers were not designed for. One of the biggest problems with these kind of superchargers is that they were actually originally had the outlet facing up, and of course on most of my swaps I've done is I flipped the supercharger over with the outlet facing down, because it tends to be a little bit more practical when you're using it on a on an older engine. If you're gonna have a fuel injected engine, I would definitely try to get one of these, because this is a more efficient running supercharger. This is a TVS. Basically the screws are more twisted, and that creates less turbulence. And so these actually run a little bit cooler than these. This kind of supercharger I actually prefer to use when I'm going carbureted. And what I like to do is put a carburetor flange over here, and let me show you that. And basically I like to get something like this. This is like a carburetor elbow plenum that you can mount a carburetor onto, obviously. And then you can see you can basically pretty easily have a carburetor mounted there. Of course, you would have to mount you a plate there, drill it so it'll fit on the back of the supercharger with just the inlet, and then weld that onto that plate, so that way you'll be able to unbolt it and bolt it. And then you can add something right there, and you can put a carburetor on there. And as you can see, I've already done that to this engine. This is a Pontiac 301, and I got a video of this engine running on a run stand. I haven't installed this engine in a vehicle yet, but there it is. It runs and everything. This is a draw-through supercharge setup right there. And I do have a video about that in case you want to see it running, and another video about the build on that. So anyway, long story short, these superchargers are very adaptable with some adaptation to put a carburetor on it. Now, one of the biggest problems you're going to have when you're trying to use these superchargers flipped upside down is that the oil reservoir on this TVS supercharger, the oil goes right here. And on this 2009 and older supercharger, the oil is actually right here, the supercharger oil. You have two gears in here which spin, and that's what, obviously with the pulley, it'll spin two gears in there and spin your rotors for your supercharger. And you have supercharger oil in there. The problem is, inside of here you have what's kind of like an eyebrow. I'm going to show you that in a minute, which you're literally going to need to grind off, because that eyebrow, which is basically like a barrier to keep the supercharger oil from splashing around, basically, in creating air bubbles. The problem is when you flip the supercharger upside down like it is right here, it's actually going to cause problems with lubricating the gears on the the teeth. So I'll show you that right now. So let me remove this plate and see, show you what I'm talking about. And you can see, now remember this supercharger is flipped upside down. These eyebrows, I call it the eyebrow. This is like a barrier. And remember, the supercharger is flipped upside down. So originally this eyebrow was up here, basically above these two gears. And that was basically to keep the supercharger oil from splashing around. You know, as these gears turned, they kind of splash oil all over this reservoir right here. And that barrier is to keep it from getting air bubbles. And a lot of superchargers don't even have this barrier. Like for example, on the M90s that are commonly used on the Grand Prix, GTPs, which a lot of people like to use on swaps also. On that kind of supercharger, you don't even have to worry about that barrier because it doesn't have one. So on that kind of supercharger, you can flip it upside down, right side out. There's no problem. But with these superchargers, and this one, I'll show you on this front here. I'll show you in a moment. There is a barrier. And you actually have to cut that off if you're going to flip it upside down like here. Because the problem is, when you have oil, you put supercharger oil in here. What happens is, as these gears are turning, you're actually going to suck air down right here in these tight crevices. And your oil is going to have a very hard time going in there and lubricating your gears. So you're going to have a whole lot of, you're going to be spinning a lot of oil around up here, but a lot of aeration down here. And you could actually burn out in the long run. You're going to burn your supercharger gears up. They're going to overheat because they don't have enough lubrication to keep those little gears lubricated and cool. And here's one of the superchargers I had previously ground that eyebrow off. You can see, you could kind of still see it, but it's a whole lot deeper in there. And I basically got my rotary die grinder with a carbide bit for aluminum, and I carefully grinded this whole eyebrow off so that you can get full lubrication around this supercharger. And that's with the snout right there removed. This is the older 09 and earlier type supercharger. I had previously used this supercharger on a project I had. Removed it because it was running a little bit too loud, and I'll show you why it was running loud. And it was a big mistake I made when I bought this supercharger. It was already pretty worn out. I'm going to show you right now what is a tall tale sign and what you want to avoid when you buy these superchargers either on eBay or at the junkyard. Basically, make sure that you can see the rotors. The rotors should be coated black, and I'm going to show you a worn, actually this supercharger, it's pretty worn, so I removed it because it's making too much noise. It still worked good actually, but it was making a lot of noise. It was annoying, so I took it off and I'm replacing it with another. And so anyway, I removed that eyebrow. You can see right there. I mean, that thing stuck out all the way to the edge of these gears, all the way forward, and I removed that with my die grinder. And here's the supercharger here. And you can see on this supercharger, it's got a nice, beautiful black coating on the rotors. This supercharger is probably very low mileage, or maybe it was just built correctly, and maybe this one wasn't built correctly, I don't know. But I actually bought this one on eBay like this. I thought, well, it's got the black stuff is flaking off the rotors. As you know, big deal, it's just a little coating. Well, that's actually a very tall tale sign that you're buying a very worn out supercharger. You do not want to buy a supercharger that has this black coating starting to peel off the rotors, because one big reason that this probably falling off is because these rotors are probably contacting each other and slowly rubbing off the coating. And so, like I said, this supercharger worked fine, but it was getting very noisy, and you could probably even hear it as I spin it. It's just very noisy. This one, much quieter. You can just hear the difference. Oops. And very quickly, in case you didn't notice, I do have this one set up for V-belts. This is the original pulley. That's for a 8-rib serpentine belt. And this one, I had it on my Oldsmobile. I actually had this supercharger on an Oldsmobile 4.3 Oldsmobile V8 260 engine. And man, putting the supercharger on that engine turned that weak engine into basically it felt like a big block. It felt like a big block engine. It just had a whole lot more torque. These superchargers had a whole lot of low end and mid-range torque. And If you got a smaller engine and you want it to feel like a big block engine, this is the easiest way to do it. I didn't put a cam in there. I didn't put headers or nothing. The engine was completely stock. I put this supercharger in there, and it just gave it double the horsepower easily. Now, the other thing I need to talk about is if you're going to use these superchargers with a carburetor, obviously you're going to have wet fuel going into these inlets here if you're going to use a carburetor. The problem is, on these rear bearings here, as fuel's going through there, it tends to wash the grease out of these two bearings right here. And you know, these superchargers were designed for dry fuel injection, and so I don't think these bearings are very sealed, and so you're gonna get a lot of gas washing out the grease over time. And so what I do with these superchargers is that I mean, you can see this one's missing the little caps right here. These caps come out real easy. And what I like to do is I like to weld on a little nut. You can see you got a little hole right here. It's kind of like a little vent holes right there. What I like to do is weld on a nut right here and then screw on two greaser fittings, so that periodically you can just get your grease gun and, you know, add some grease to those bearings just to make sure they stay full of grease. As you know, you put on the miles and the years go by, you want to grease these once in a while. And I could actually show you on this 301 engine. I did just that. It's hard to see, but you can see right here, I actually got grease dirt right there. And I could put my grease holes right here and grease it once in a while. I got one on each side, and I apologize, it's probably hard to see, but I got grease dirts right down there. You know, I'm going to grease these up once in a while. Of course, if you use these superchargers for your fuel injection, you don't need to worry about greasing those needle bearings right there. Also, you could also install these superchargers as they were meant to be installed. If you don't want to cut out the eyebrow like I showed you just now, you could actually install them like this, in which case you'll have to make some kind of manifold, and your runners will have to go up from each individual port to this plenum up here. You know, maybe if you're going to put it on a V8, 4 on this side, 4 runners coming up, and obviously 4 on that side. And then right here you could put a carburetor plenum. Actually, I got right here the original Jaguar, I guess, intake elbow, and it actually bolted right there. Boom. And what I was actually planning to do with one of my projects was I was going to make an adapter, put a carburetor right there, and that could pull the fuel air through there. And I was actually going to do a build with tubular runners coming from the top of the outlet of the supercharger down to each individual port. And I was going to use this, and then I was going to actually have one tube coming here to the bypass valve. This is the bypass valve, and that's so that you don't get the uneven idle. You know, basically it's open at idle, and the purpose is this is to, you know, these superchargers, they generally pump out more air than the engine needs at idle. And when you don't have a bypass valve, that's when you get that surging, when you get that very, you know, it almost sounds like you're gassing it, you're giving it gas while you're idling there. It almost, you know, if you're in traffic, it almost sounds like, you know, you want to race when you're at a stoplight. And so, like, you know, on my vehicles, I put a bypass valve, like this 301 right here. I got a bypass valve down there, which is, the bypass valve is actually from a Mini Cooper. And there it is. That valve is open at idle and closed at full throttle. And all you need to do is route this hose to a vacuum source, really. So at idle, the vacuum will overcome the spring loader valve and open at idle. And then at full throttle, they have very little vacuum, and the spring will force this throttle closed. That way you get full boost at full wide open throttle. And so back to the TVS supercharger. This is actually the better supercharger to use if you're going fuel injection. I wouldn't use this supercharger, obviously, for carburetor for obvious reasons. You know, the intake is on the front of the supercharger instead of the rear like the other superchargers. And by the way, this throttle is not original to the supercharger. This TVS supercharger originally had one of those electronic throttles, and And basically what I did is I adapted this 92 millimeter throttle to the original throttle. This is actually the original throttle here, but I did remove the blade and the electronics. And I basically welded on this, I believe it's a 92 millimeter LS aftermarket throttle. This is a 92 millimeter, and it's a nice big free-flowing throttle. That way I can, you know, run a regular cable. Basically a throttle cable come always from the firewall, pull on this throttle. And that way I can do it without the electronic throttle. And this throttle also has the TPS and idle air control valve. That way I can use a more conventional type computer. You'll notice that the TVS supercharger actually has a smaller pulley on it. And that's because you can spin these superchargers faster than the earlier superchargers because they tend to run cooler. And then, as some of you might know, I did install this supercharger on a Cadillac 8.2 liter 500 engine that I haven't run yet. But I had comments on that video. I do have another video of a build I did on my Cadillac 500, and I had a few comments saying that, hey, this supercharger, it's just too small for that engine. Well, you know what? This kind of supercharger comes in Jaguars and Land Rovers that make 575 horsepower. So you tell me if that's not, you know, enough flow for that Cadillac engine. You know, that Cadillac engine only makes 200 horsepower from the factory. And so you tell me if this supercharger is not big enough for that. Even though it is not exactly a big supercharger, it's a very efficient supercharger. Now these superchargers, they did come with intercoolers, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. But I originally installed this supercharger without an intercooler onto the engine. Let me go ahead and show you. I have the engine right here. Let me show you that. So I had actually designed this intake to accept that TVS supercharger, this is a Cadillac 425 intake, and it's a single plane. It was the easiest to adapt and put this rectangular plate on there. And then on the plate I did drill holes in there so that I can mount that TVS supercharger on there. And I liked it because this intake manifold actually comes down. It starts from the port and actually goes down so that I can actually fit it. I was going to fit it under the hood and try to make it a sleeper. And as time went by, and I didn't like the fact that it was not intercooled. And then even though this supercharger does run cooler than the other superchargers, they still produce heat. Just the very, you know, idea of compressing air, you're going to make heat. So especially since it's a dry, you know, this is a fuel injected dry air runs through these. They tend to run harder than your superchargers that have fuel going through them. That's one of the reasons the older superchargers, like your Wind and your B&M and your 671, 871 superchargers, you can get away with those inefficient type superchargers. You know, those superchargers make a lot of heat. But since you got fuel and air going through those superchargers, they tend to run cooler. But then obviously as the years went by and everything became fuel injected, the engineers realized that running dry air through the supercharger created, you know, more heat. You didn't have that cooling anymore. And so all these modern superchargers come with intercoolers. And so anyway, I was going to put that supercharger in this engine, and then I kind of didn't like the idea that it was not intercooled, so I was starting to think of ways to intercool it. And then, lo and behold, I actually came up with an idea, and that was why not just use the intercooler they actually came on this on that supercharger. This is actually the same you know, 2010 and newer supercharger with the intercooler assembly on it. And these two pipes on each side of the supercharger assembly are actually, coolant will run through there. You got two long intercoolers, which are kind of like heater cores, but they're thicker. And that way, as this supercharger is compressing air, it's getting hot, it actually comes up. Like I said, these superchargers blow the air, the outlet is up. And you can see how it kind of blows up, and the air goes to each side of this intake plenum here. And then, like I said, there's intercoolers in here, and as the hot air is being blown through those intercoolers, as it goes down to each individual ports, it'll run a lot cooler, and you can run more timing and get more power. And like I said, this kind of supercharger on some of those Jaguars and the Land Rovers made up to 575 horsepower. So this is a very good supercharger to have. It has a whole lot of potential. And of course, you can see this one's missing the throttle. I mean, you can basically get this, do your own work, adapt a cable-driven throttle, or if you get the means, you can put a computer that can control the electronically controlled throttle, and you'll have a very good supercharger. There's the bypass valve on this one. Let me go ahead and show you the underside of this supercharger. So here's a supercharger actually flipped upside down, or actually right side up. This plate is not original. I put that there, and you can see it's got some cutouts right here, and that was so that, and I drilled some holes through it, and that was obviously so that I could bolt it onto this intake manifold right here. And so you can see the bypass valve, open it idle, closed at full throttle, and let me go ahead and spin it for you. And you can see that these rotors are much more twisted, and this is the direction it spins. And this is makes it a much more efficient, cooler running supercharger than the older ones that have the rotors a little bit more horizontal, I guess you can say. Like these are almost like a screw, and that's just going to give you better efficiency. And so this is the better supercharger to use if you're going fuel injected. If you're going carburetor, then I would use the other ones I just talked about. Of course, on this one, if you're going to use this one, you don't have to do the modifications I was talking about onto the oil reservoir. If you're going to use it like this, with it, this is, you know, right side up. And you know what, let me go ahead and flip this one over so you can see what it's like on the underside. So here's that same supercharger flipped over. And you can see it, and you can see it's the same supercharger as this one right here. But this one's all mounted to the intercooler assembly. And it blows, obviously it blows down, and you can actually see the fins through these ports. You can see part of the, you know, the intercoolers, kind of like a radiator, to cool the hot compressed air that the supercharger produces. So in my opinion, it wouldn't be terribly too hard to make a manifold of some sort to basically continue these ports to the runners on your V8 engine, you know. You know, it'd be kind of like making short little headers, you know what I mean? Get you a flange, obviously cut it out to the same holes as these ports on this supercharger, and then run those ports to your individual ports on your engine, and then obviously make another flange for the side of the engine, and then you can have a nice, powerful, boosted engine with intercooling. And so this would be an excellent choice for a retrofit on a different engine, if you got some fabrication skills, obviously. So here's another project I'm working on. This is actually a Cadillac 500 engine with a Cadillac 425 intake manifold that I've basically butchered. I've cut the entire center of the intake off. You know, you can see it's just on there loose, and I'm using this for test fitting purposes. And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld some pipes onto each one of these ports, carefully match it to these ports. And what I'm going to do is make sort of a cross ram intake manifold. Basically what a cross ram intake manifold is basically you're bringing these 4 ports to this side of the engine via runners all the way to this side, and these 4 ports over here I'm going to run to this side of the engine. And you know, you've seen those. They'll have one carburetor over here and another carburetor over here, sort of staggered. However, I'm not going to put carburetors. I'm going to put 2 superchargers on here. That's going to be my next project. And let me show you that with the superchargers on there. So here is basically my newest project. I'm going to put superchargers, 2 superchargers, twin superchargers on this mock-up engine I got going here. This is a mock-up engine for a Cadillac 500 that I'm going to put in a running vehicle. I've decided to go this route because, well, I mean, you can't go wrong with 2 superchargers, you know. And I'm actually going to go ahead and do that cross ram intake manifold idea. I'm going to run 4 intake runners from down here to this supercharger, and the other 4 runners from this head, I'm going to run them, you know, kind of like crossing fingers to this supercharger. So it'll be like a kind of like a cross ram. I'm going to put a plenum back here, connecting to these two superchargers together to one large 800 CFM carburetor back here. This is, of course, this is the initial steps in that project. I had to kind of make a custom cap distributor. This is actually a points distributor. Well, it's a points distributor that I've converted to electronic. And I had to basically cut off the top part of that cap and glue on this crab cap so that I could clear this driver's side supercharger, because originally the wires were going to be hitting up here pretty heavy. So this is yet another crab cap the distributor I've designed. I've got a few things done. I still got a long way to go, obviously. I'm going to be running a serpentine belt, obviously, down here. On this one I did decide to put a slightly smaller supercharger crank pulley, since I got two superchargers on here. So basically I'm going to have a belt running from this crank pulley up to this power steering. It's going to wrap around this first supercharger, then come down. I'm going to have an idler pulley down here right below this supercharger pulley. Wrap around that idler pulley, then come back around, wrap around the second supercharger, and then I'm going to have that belt come down to a tensioner. I'm going to have a tensioner right about here. Supercharger will wrap around this pulley and then go to the 8-rib crank pulley down there, which is kind of hard to see. And so I'll be working on that. This is my next project, actually. This is what I'm working on right now, and hopefully I'll make a newer video with more done on that. And so I'm pretty excited about getting this one. Two superchargers, you know, there's nothing like popping the hood and having two superchargers under the hood. Of course, these are not big superchargers, and that's one of the reasons I'm using two. This is an 8.2 liter 500 cubic inch engine. You know, this is not a high RPM engine, and so I do desire, of course, more horsepower, and obviously that's going to give me quite a bit more boost. My goal is not to make it a high revving engine, believe it or not. I don't want to make it a full all-out race engine, because, you know, this stock engine can't really handle that. My goal is to make more horsepower within the RPM range that this engine was designed for. And so that's what I'm working on. I think I'll go ahead and keep this V-belt pulley, run the water pump and the alternator. And once again, I'll have the serpentine belt running the supercharger's 8-rib. And I'm probably going to put those two superchargers in this car. Believe it or not, they're actually going to fit under the hood. This 72 Buick Riviera actually already has a Cadillac 500 engine in it. I do have another video of it just running. It's just a regular Cadillac 500 engine in there, and it's pretty powerful. Don't get me wrong. It has a lot of torque. You know, the horsepower does not tell you the full story of this engine. This engine has a ton of torque. It'll smoke those tires easily. But of course, I still want more power than that, and so I'm going to be putting both of those superchargers in this car under the hood, I think. And there's my 55 Chevy. There's my Firebird. I had to remove the supercharger from the Firebird because it was just making too much noise. So now there's that hole I'm talking about. And I got another video about that. There's my Ford work truck. It's fully loaded with plenty of bricks as I'm trying to make my castle. Still got about, I would say about 12 feet to go for the second story. That's the entrance. Of course, that takes up a whole lot of time. You know, I don't got a whole lot of time for all these projects. And that's just one of the many things I'm working on there. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave me a line. See you guys next time.